Viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and it's 6 o'clock. Coming up tonight, a year ago today, a week under investigation. 1 year on, we've basically remained none the wiser as to why. It's got me wondering, is there enough transparency in politics? And get this, at a cost of £2.6 billion per year, the UK is going to return to the EU's science programme, Horizon. Some people say this is a betrayal of Brexit. Others, though, saying it is an absolutely sensible step in EU-UK relations. What says you? And it appears that it's even harder than ever to get on in the world when it comes to the haves and the have-nots. Social mobility is at its worst level in over a century. Why? And should children be able to transition their gender at school? It looks likely that the government is about to U-turn on its recent position on that. We've got all of that and more. But before we get into it, let's get tonight's latest headlines.
Thanks, Michelle. Our top stories this evening. More than 150 counter-terrorism officers are working around the clock in an effort to locate escaped terror suspect Daniel Khalifa. GB News sources have confirmed that he's accused of spying for Iran. Speaking earlier today, the Justice Secretary said there'll be an independent investigation into how he escaped from Wandsworth Prison. Security checks are being tightened at ports, and police have closed a stretch of the M20 in Kent. Despite the incident, the Prime Minister says there's been fewer prison escapes under a Conservative government.
There are something like 4,000 more prison officers than there were in 2017. And with regard to the Labour Party who posed the question, again, the facts show that during their 13 years in office, there were 10 times the number of escaped prisoners than you've seen in the 13 years of Conservative-led government. But we're doing everything we can to find this person. And as I said, if anyone has any information, please do contact the police.
Well, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer questions that. He says the government is totally at fault.
I think we now know there were already some pretty damning reports into Wandsworth, issues about staffing, issues about buildings, and that's a pattern of behaviour now under this government, whether it's this prison or other prisons or other infrastructure across the country. And it certainly hasn't helped that in the last 10 years we've had 10 Justice Secretaries, and I know from my time as Director of Public Prosecutions just how important stability is when it comes to criminal justice.
A police investigation is being launched into dozens of baby deaths and injuries at Nottingham University Hospital's NHS Trust. More than 1,700 families were part of an independent review of maternity care at NUH, which was led by Donna Ockenden. The senior midwife led a similar investigation at the Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital NHS Trust. Network Rail has admitted health and safety failings over a train crash that killed 3 people. The company did not warn the driver that the track near Stonehaven was unsafe back in August of 2020. The ScotRail train derailed after hitting a landslide, then crashed into the side of a bridge, causing carriages to fall down an embankment. The train's driver, conductor and a passenger all died. A third man has been arrested in connection with the suspected arson at the Crooked House pub in Staffordshire. The building, which was known as Britain's wonkiest pub, was demolished soon after the fire last month. That caused widespread outrage. A 51-year-old man from Buckingham was questioned and released on conditional bail. The PM is facing another by-election following the resignation of his former Deputy Chief Whip, Chris Pincher. The MP for Tamworth made the decision after losing an appeal against an 8-week suspension over groping allegations. In a statement, Mr Pincher said he didn't want uncertainty for his constituents. He sent his resignation letter to the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt.
This was a situation that needed to be resolved, and now we know the way forward, and we will put forward a very strong candidate from the Conservative Party who will help attract investment, jobs to Staffordshire and to the wider region, and that's what we'll be campaigning on.
Well, as we've been hearing, the UK is rejoining the European Union's £85 billion science research programme, Horizon. The move follows months of negotiations with a bespoke agreement signed off with the EU. Researchers in the UK will be able to apply for grants to take part in Horizon projects. That's until the programme ends in 2027. The UK had been excluded from the scheme because of a disagreement over the Northern Ireland Protocol. The Ryanair chief executive was hit with a surprise outside the European Commission's headquarters in Brussels.
I love cream cakes. They're my favourite. OK, so...
Well, that's the moment that climate protesters pied Michael O'Leary, shouting, "Stop the pollution," as he was getting ready to deliver a petition. 1.5 million people have signed the document, demanding flights be allowed to cross French skies during air traffic control strikes. Ryanair claiming that it's one of the most efficient airlines because of the large number of passengers that it fits into its aircraft. And it's officially the hottest day of the year so far, with temperatures topping 32.6 degrees in Surrey this afternoon. The heat wave is also on the cusp of breaking the record for the longest consecutive streak of hot days above 30 degrees. The warm weather is expected to continue into the weekend, with Saturday forecast to reach a scorching 33 degrees. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying, play GB News. Now let's get straight back to Michelle.
Hi there, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. What did you make to that Michael O'Leary thing there, just being basically cream pied in the face? I don't have much time for Michael O'Leary, I've got to be honest, but whatever you think of him, park that to one side. You cannot just go running around doing that to an individual just because you disagree with them or dislike them or whatever. If you ask me, it's assault. But I also do worry as well. I think there are some quite double standards in our society, because if that was 2 men that charged up to a woman and did like that, I suspect that the police might be robustly looking into that, because, again, I repeat, it's assault, isn't it? I don't know. You get in touch, you tell me. Anyway, I'm with you till 7 alongside me, my panel, Martin Daubney, of course, a fellow GB News presenter and former Brexit Party MEP, and Michael Walker, a contributing editor at Novara Media. Welcome, gentlemen. You know the drill, don't you? It's not just about us three. It's very much about you guys at home as well. Get in touch with me, gbviews@gbnews.com, or you can tweet me at GBNews. I also noted in the headlines as well, Chris Pincher, another by-election for the Tories. They need that, like a hole in the head, don't they, Martin?
As Brenda from Bristol might say, oh, not another one.
Brenda from Bristol, yeah. I'd forgotten about her.
So
Michael?
here we are.
Yeah, I mean, the 9th by-election for Rishi Sunak is pretty unlucky. If you are a historically unpopular government, you don't really want all of these by-elections one after another.
You do not, but some might say it is good to see some accountability taking place because today marks a year since a year-long suspension for someone that was quite a prominent, I have to say, MP and a former chief whip for a very long time, since the Blair era up until about 2021. Nick Brown has had a complaint made against him. We don't know the nature of the complaint. Nick Brown at the time reckons that he didn't even know the nature of the complaint against him, which I think is a bit weird. How can you not know what is being alleged against you? Anyway, long story short, he was suspended, sits as an independent now. No updates from the Labour Party, which has got some people saying that there should be more transparency in politics.
Well, there's a culture, isn't there, of these protracted, pregnant pause suspensions, which seem to go on forever. And then there's no resolution, or we don't really find out what it is. Or anyway, they're allowed to carry on with their job. We saw it with Corbyn. We saw it with Diane Abbott. We've seen it with many. And with this one, I don't suppose we'll ever find out until they've decided that he'll just be pensioned off, put out to grass. He'll get a pension. He'll get a golden handshake. There's no real accountability. And actually, it strikes me of kind of indicative, symptomatic of the entire public sector, which is in the police force. It seems you can commit all kinds of sins. It goes through this lengthy inquiry process. And anyway, they still get a full payout. If this was the private sector, they'd be out on their ear, sharpish.
Michael?
Well, I suppose, I mean, I'm not sure how much there is to say. It does seem a bit odd that it's been a year and we still don't know the nature of it. He's claiming he doesn't know the nature of it. I suppose I would just dispute that idea that this doesn't happen in the private sector. Now, I don't want to in any way cast aspersions on what Nick Brown may have been accused of, but think of someone such as Harvey Weinstein, right? That was someone working in the private sector, got to get away with some pretty awful things without facing any consequences. Jeffrey Epstein as well. Now, again, I'm not comparing the actions of these men to these
the most extreme
MPs.
Example possible
but
in the private sector.
Why it's relevant to use those incredibly extreme examples is because those men got away with it for decades, and that was in the private sector. So the idea that this is something which is unique to the public sector, or especially is prevalent in the public sector, I think is just nonsense, frankly.
Jackie says they're all to blame. I don't think you're happy with any MPs at the moment. You're putting them all in the same bucket. I don't know. I mean, if you'd been accused of doing something, would you want the nation to know all about it? Or do you believe in innocent until proven guilty? If I'd done something wrong, quite frankly, I would want there to be due process applied and then consequences at the end of that if indeed I was found guilty. Anyway, look, Britain is going to rejoin the EU's science funding project. There's been a lot of conversation about this today. This is a scheme that you'll be familiar with that is known as the Horizon scheme. Lots of happiness in the scientific community because now they will be able to apply for money. And this fund is quite a massive fund, actually, £81 billion. Now, this scheme, it's going to cost us about 2.6 billion there or thereabouts per year. And there are real divided opinions on this. Some people saying, as I've just been describing, this is great news for cooperation. Other people saying it's the first step, though, to the UK essentially going back into the EU. What do you reckon?
Well, it's a complete betrayal of Brexit. It's as simple as that. The European Union was voted out in its entirety. No ifs, no buts. No membership schemes, 15 billion quid to the EU is exactly the sort of thing 17.4 million people voted against. And it's a bad idea for other reasons because Horizon isn't politically neutral. In fact, its stated aims are in developing, supporting and implementing EU policies while tackling global challenges. We know that means climate change. It means net zero targets. So that means that the types of research that will qualify for Horizon within the UK will have to box tick EU directives and initiatives. That means being tied to the political direction of the EU. And it gets worse, because when we signed the cooperative agreement, the cooperation agreement, T&C, back last year, part of that was tying us into the European Defence Fund, the Army. The EU Army is a part of this deal. You remember Nick Clegg told us the European Army was a dangerous fantasy. It wasn't. It was a reality. It's a dangerous reality. It means military alignment. It means closer ties with Brussels. It's everything Brexiteers voted against, and it's back. It's a policy Keir Starmer would be proud of. Why has Sunak done this? It's a Remainer policy. It goes against everything that people voted for to get Brexit done in 2019. It's a betrayal of that vote, and I cannot believe... I just wonder, what are the Tories for? This is a Labour policy coming in via Sunak.
Well, we can ponder on that last point in a second, but Michael...
I mean, it seems like a slight overreaction from you there, I think. I mean, the plan was always, as far as I understand, to stay a part of Horizon, this scientific funding mechanism. So even Boris Johnson, when he was bringing through his version of the withdrawal agreement, was in favour of this. What happened is that the EU actually blocked us becoming a member because they were unhappy about the process in Northern Ireland, because they didn't think that we could guarantee a soft border. So the idea that just doing what Boris Johnson already wanted to do now suddenly is remain by the back door, I think is a little bit odd. I also think this sort of very uncompromising vision of Brexit you have is pretty unhelpful. I mean, I really don't think it is the case that when the majority of the British population voted for Brexit, they really wanted to make sure that British scientists couldn't collaborate with European scientists, right? That's not why people voted.
No, what people... Clear vote to leave the orbit of Brussels. There's no ifs or buts. That's what people... The big illusion, the lie, the Remainer lie, that there was certain bits that the voter wanted to keep. We were lied to about the slogans on buses is a complete myth. People want to be separated, a clean break Brexit. And back to you're right, Boris's Brexit was a Brexit in name only, as far as I'm concerned. It left the cat flap open on trade, on Northern Ireland, on Horizon, and here we are.
So do you not want any cooperation at all?
What I'm saying is we can cooperate with pioneers around the world. India, countries like India, the USA in AI, there is huge potential out there. We can still trade with the EU. In fact, imports and exports are up since Brexit. The fact of the matter is you've got to pay 15 billion quid to be a part of this gang. So, researching with Europe is a great idea, but the EU is charging us 15 billion quid to do it. That is an expensive club that we voted to leave.
So, I mean, there are certain aspects of cooperation with the EU where you would have to give away a large degree of sovereignty. So, for example, joining the single market or joining the customs union. Yes, you wouldn't be able to go and make your own trade deals with India. Now, how strong a position we are as a small country to make trade deals with sort of huge economies is a separate question. But here, I don't think there's any reason why a British scientist can't cooperate with an Indian scientist, because other British scientists are getting funded via the Horizon mechanism. Indeed, the same scientist could do some projects funded by Horizon and some projects in cooperation with Indian scientists. It doesn't make any sense that there is this zero-sum...
We could and should be doing those deals with emerging countries like...
Why not both?
But because there's 15 billion reasons why we've got to pay membership.
But we're going to get as much back as we put in. I mean, obviously, Britain is a bit of a science superpower.
You're talking about what's being called the underperformance clause. I'll just be clear about what this is. What it's saying is that the UK should be compensated should UK scientists receive significantly less money than the UK puts into the programme.
Well, that means what you get back, what you pay in, so what's the point joining? And we could spend 15 billion quid, surely in a better way, forging closer ties with emerging economies such as India. I mean, why do we have to do this under their rules? And you mentioned the single market and you mentioned the customs union. I think that is where we're heading. This is the thin end of a wedge of closer alignment, death by 1,000 policies, death by 1,000 paper cuts. This is precisely the sort of thing that Brexiteers will call conspiracy theorists about. And like I said, I'm just staggered that it's a Conservative government that have done this. This is like they've stolen Keir Starmer's homework.
There's a lot of people that are saying similar things to you, Martin. There's a lot of people that are saying that they do feel, actually, that this is that first step, that there's a concern that there's a first step and it's just going to be, this is the first rung on the ladder, if you see, to us ending up back in the EU. Do you think that would ever be a possibility? Do you think that would be, say, if Labour got re-elected, do you reckon there would be a scenario whereby, inch by inch, they were trying to take us back into the EU?
I think it's very possible that there are more and more areas of the economy where people begin to recognise that actually some sort of cooperation with a larger bloc is very useful, because how global trade works essentially is someone's got to make the rules. So there are lots of countries who basically have to conform to the rules set in the United States, not because they're in any kind of formal agreement with the United States, but because they want to trade there. Similar with the Global South and China, similar with Europe. So even if you aren't part of a formal agreement, you will often have to just follow people's rules de facto because they're who you want to trade with. So I think it probably will end up being the case that Britain decides, oh, we might as well formalise some of these arrangements if we're following their rules anyway.
The key difference is that if we do a trade deal with America or USA, we don't pay 15 billion quid to join the club. That's the point. It's got a very expensive buy-in. It's like a game of poker where the stakes are high just to even play.
And get it back again.
That's an unfair deal for Britain. And like I say, politically, things like shale, coal, North Sea oil, then we wouldn't be able to put research into that under this scheme because it directly contravenes the EU's 2050 net zero targets. That's what I'm saying.
It's
restrictive in what we're even allowed to put into new technology and research.
Wow. Go on.
Well, I don't think it does restrict what you're allowed to put into new technology and research. It's just you wouldn't be able to do it within the Horizon scheme, right? So there are going to be other funding mechanisms for universities. I also think the idea that we'd move away from net zero would be a mistake. And to be energy sovereign, whereby we just use our own energy, you'd have to have a much more radical transformation of capitalism than I think you're currently proposing, because you'd have to end all kind of trade.
Why don't your lot suggest nationalising North Sea oil? Anyway.
Yeah.
Loves it. There you go. Don't plant ideas in his head. Many people out there saying that you feel a Brexit betrayal is on the horizon. I see what you did there. Smart cookies. Right. So I want to talk to you. Lots coming your way. I want to ask you as well about children. Should they be allowed to transition their gender at school? Really? What do you think to that? I think there's a U-turn perhaps coming from this government on that. Don't go anywhere. See you in 2.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, this is Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Martin Daubney alongside me, as is Michael Walker. Lots of you getting in touch. You don't hold much trust, I have to say, for our ruling classes when it comes to whether or not we're going to end up back in the EU. Many of you are saying absolutely, this really is that first step in going back into the EU. Some people saying you really would prefer that we were not getting back into this Horizon deal. As I said, at different points of view they're a part of society, really hailing today as a very good day. Others expressing a similar view to some of you guys at home. Now let's talk children, because Rishi Sunak, apparently there's rumours afoot that he might be looking to, how do I put this nicely, U-turn perhaps on some of his thoughts around whether or not children should be able to transition their gender at school. The draft guidance now says that kids should be able to socially transition with the consent of their parents, which basically means they can go by a different name, they can put a different uniform on and change their pronouns and all the rest of it. Martin Daubney, where do you stand on this?
Another day, another U-turn, and it's not just Sunak, you know, Starmer's the same. They flip-flop more often than a sort of Marbella beach shop. It's ridiculous. People want clarity, they want leadership, and they want a firm position on what is, I think, one of the biggest travesties of the modern age.
But that position has got to be doable. So the original position was that the original rumours was that Rishi Sunak and government were going to try and outlaw basically this transitioning. That was the kind of tough talk. But now what they're saying is that because I think it's the Equalities Act was saying that it's going to infringe on the rights of those people, so therefore it wouldn't stand up in a court of law essentially.
Yeah, it's the same as why we can't deport terrorists. It's the same as why we can't close our borders, because the human rights of people trumps our own sovereignty, our own right to rule. Donald Trump, you know, blasted all of this out of schools in America, and then he was unelected, and Biden turned it around on day one. That's the problem. You know, I think every decision that the Tories make now is going to get blown out the water anyway. They feel like a corpse government. Back to this point, I think the notion that children can be, I think the word is groomed in school by activists with a vested interest in gender politics. They've learned this from their university years, using our children as their own social experiments. This is a contagion, and I think it needs to be kicked out of schools. I'd like to have an independent audit of everybody who's allowed into schools, every external educator. No more mermaids, no more Stonewall. Let's get pride out of the classrooms to get this out, because we just don't need to be teaching this stuff. Teach kids, educate them, don't indoctrinate them.
Michael?
Well, it seems like you're having a completely different argument to what this story actually is. So what this story actually is if a parent wants their child to transition and the child wants to socially transition, then the school should respect that. So it's about the autonomy and individual rights of a child and their parent. So this is about the family making the decision. So now you're saying this is about the school indoctrinating children. It's the precise opposite. This is saying that family and children should together be able to make the decision
but that wasn't
about how someone transitions.
But that wasn't Kemi Badenoch's position. That wasn't the position of the Tory government a few weeks ago. What I'm saying is they're changing position to go for something more moderate.
Well, they're changing position to a position which respects individual rights and respects the rights of parents to decide how their children should be raised, which should, to me, be a conservative value.
And they're changing their position because they know that the laws which will be going against them won't allow them to take that position anyway. It's the same on controlling borders. It's because the human rights legislation would be weaponised against the government, and the government would lose. And that's the problem. You know, as long
is it a problem? I mean, do you think that if a parent wants their child to socially transition, if the child wants to socially transition, remember, we can be talking about someone who's 16 or 17, right? If the child wants to, the parent wants them to, you think the school should turn around and say, no, you can't do what you want to do, you can't do what your parents want to do, we are not going to allow you to socially transition.
Why does that need to involve schools? If a child wants to socially transition with the blessing of their parents, why does that need to take place in schools? That's a private matter between the family and the child. And how do the children learn these ideas in the first place? Forget about just.
Well, again, this learning idea. So
you'll probably know this stuff in schools.
You'll probably know the video of Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s, sort of complaining that kids are getting taught they have an inalienable right to be gay.
Yeah,
right?
It's a complete.
I don't think it is a complete different thing. That's the politics that came along with Section 28, where it became impossible to talk about something such as homosexuality. Now, I grew up as a young gay guy when Section 28. I mean, it was removed when I was about 14, so it would still have been affecting schools and when I was in year 7. And I think that was really, really toxic, saying teachers can't talk about homosexuality. Now, people would have talked about it exactly the same way that you did. People say people are grooming people to be gay. People didn't used to be gay, now loads of people are gay. It's because of these groomers going into school. Now what we realise is that actually there were just lots of people who were always gay, and now they have the confidence to say it. I think we're going to see a very similar retrospective view when it comes to transgender people.
You know, having a healthy conversation about your chosen sexuality is quite different from encouraging hormonal treatment or a route towards surgery. Those conversations start in schools, and parents are then getting the baggage. In my son's peer group, there are at least 4 kids in every year who are trans, and guess what? 2 or 3 of them have changed their mind after a couple of years, because just a phase they're going through. Almost all of them are on the autistic spectrum, and through proper conversations and learning to love themselves for who they are, confused young individuals, rather than somebody who needs surgical or hormonal intervention or indoctrination, they can have perfectly happy lives as ordinary gay people down the line. You cannot reverse the routes down hormonal and surgical routes. And what I'm saying is, if individual parents and individual children want to do this, fine, but keep it out of schools.
Well, it's going to be in the schools, right? Because a child spends a lot of their time in the school. So if a parent has decided that we think it's in the best interest of this kid to socially transition, now, you accept now there are gay people. But in the 80s, people would have said... No, but in the 80s, there'd be people saying, well, no, it's not the case that people are just gay and it's about whether or not they have the confidence to speak about it. They would say, these people are being groomed, they're being encouraged to be gay. Now, I think of transgender people in exactly the same way. I think there are many people who, in the past, would have come out as transgender, who instead ended up sort of living their life a little bit uncomfortable in their body, in their social identity. Now these people are able to sort of come out and be open about that. And then people like you say, oh, they're being groomed. Oh, this is social contagion. No, maybe this is just people realising that now they can speak comfortably about who they are. It's a little bit like being left-handed. So there was a period when we as society recognised that some people can be left-handed. Suddenly, no one was left-handed. Then it went up to 10% of the population.
Right, hang on a second, because if I'm writing with if my child's writing with his left hand and I decide, you know what, your life's probably going to be easier if you write with your right hand or whatever, and I shove a pencil in his right hand, the worst that's going to happen is going to be ambidextrous. He's going to be able to write with both hands. Good for you. There's not going to be any long-term material damage to his life and his well-being by being forced to hold a pencil.
They won't surgically have their left hand removed.
No, I think the analogy is actually somewhat different. So the damage... So when it wasn't accepted that people would be left-handed, the damage would be making someone who is naturally left-handed spend their life writing with their right hand. Then what they get called is, oh, my God, they've got terrible handwriting. This person is very bad at school. What you realise is that if you just let them write with their left hand, they're going to have a better life, they're going to have a more productive life. Now, I think a similar thing is the case. I mean, it's complicated. Don't get me wrong, this is complicated.
It's a really daft analogy.
Why?
Yeah, so do I.
Saying, for the reasons I've just said, that actually, if you shove a pencil in the wrong person's, in someone's wrong hand, you know...
I think that can be very damaging.
Yeah, your writing might be a bit messy. My brother was one of those. My dad wouldn't refuse point blank to accept my brother. One of my brothers was left-handed. He now writes with both hands, ambidextrous. He doesn't really care. He's not scarred in any way, shape or form. He's quite talented, actually, with his writing in both hands. I'd love to be able to do it. But what we're talking about here, as a mummy myself, I am deeply concerned about this because, yes, I imagine that there are some people, some children out there that perhaps, to follow the literal definition, are transgender. But I think there are a huge amount of children that are not transgender, that are just uncomfortable, particularly when it comes to going through puberty. Your body starts changing in all kinds of ways, and especially as a woman, as a girl. You go from just being like, you know, one of the lads you're mucking in to all of a sudden you're developing these breasts and all the rest of it, and then you start to become seen by people as a sexual being. And if you're not that way inclined or whatever, it becomes quite uncomfortable. And if someone said to you, you know what, I can wave you this wand, and actually, ta-da, you can transition and make all of that go away, that would be very attractive and appealing to an awful lot of people. But when you start shoving people onto that route, when you start pumping them full of these hormone blockers, puberty blockers and whatever else, you start chopping off people's bits, you start making them infertile. And then actually, when you get down the line, you realise, oh, you know what, I am who I am, and I wish that I could have just been happy with who I am. Well, guess what? Do you know what? Your ship has now sailed. You've permanently damaged your body. You've perhaps permanently made yourself infertile. And that's why I think this is a very important, I agree it's sensitive, but a very important topic which needs to be robustly debated. It needs to be held up to scrutiny, and I think it needs to be challenged as well.
Well, the ship can sail in the other direction as well, right? So, obviously, you know, my age, when I was growing up, it would have been very difficult to come out as trans at school. Now I know many people who've come out as trans later in life.
I think it's become fashionable now. If you can say you've got a trans kid, I think that people think that makes them have a little bit of social kudos, if you ask me.
I really don't think there are people who are intentionally transing their kids for social cachet. I think the argument that maybe there is some social contagion among teenagers is stronger. But what we do have to recognise is that some people are genuinely trans. They're only going to be happy if they can transition. And it is much easier if you start that earlier than later, because those physical changes do make transitioning harder.
Tiny percentile of Britons, yet here we are surrendering the rights of young women, surrendering the rights of other people in the name of this social experiment.
Well, do you know what? An important conversation, a difficult one as well in some respects. But anyway, it is a conversation that will rumble on and on. For now, let's just press pause and remind ourselves how wonderful the weather is right now.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Another warm night to come overnight with elevated temperatures for the time of year. More hot sunshine to come then into Friday. Not for everyone. There is a fair amount of medium and high-level cloud around, and there are some showers drifting north across Scotland and Northern Ireland overnight. Most of the rain not reaching the ground. These are relatively high-base showers, but could see some flashes of lightning as that clears away. Then for most places it's dry with clear spells, some low cloud creeping into the east coast. But wherever you are, it's a warm night. A muggy feel, 18, 19, 20 Celsius in the south, mid to high teens in the north. And that sets us off for a warm start to Friday. Still some of that low cloud and mist around the east coast, but it tends to retreat during the morning to the immediate beaches. And there'll be some low cloud creeping around the southwestern coast as well, with the potential for some showers to turn up later here. Otherwise, for many, it's bright skies and another hot day. Mid to high 20s widely, 30 or 31 Celsius in the south and southeast. Then into Saturday, it's another warm start to the day. Plenty of sunshine from the word go, especially towards the east and the south. A change on the way, though, for the north and northwest. Northern and western Scotland see some showers and some cooler air later. That spreads across the northern half of the country on Sunday, clearing elsewhere on Monday.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Well, there you go. What a scorcher. I love it, don't you? Right, listen, are you wealthier than your parents? If so, was it easy to become that? Do you want your kids to be wealthier, more successful than you? Do you think they will be able to achieve it? I'm asking because when it comes to social mobility, it is now harder than it has ever been before to move up that greasy ladder. We'll look at why.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, Martin Daubney, a fellow GB News presenter and former Brexit Party MEP, and Michael Walker, a contributing editor at Novara Media. Lots of you guys getting in touch. I will come back, actually, to some of your points because I do, I find what some of you have to say fascinating. So I'll bring you in before the end of the programme, worry not. But for now, I want to talk to you about social mobility. Here in this country, it is at its worst that it's been in about half a century. This is the Institute for Fiscal Studies. It's basically found that people growing up in the north of England and the Midlands, as well as those from a minority ethnic background, would find it a lot harder to become wealthier than their parents. What do you think to this, Michael?
Yeah, so it's not just people in the north of England and people of ethnic minorities. Basically, everyone is going to find it harder to find themselves in a higher decile than their parents than would have been the case previously. Now, a number of reasons for this. So I suppose one sort of changes in the job market. It's sort of harder to get into a job at a bottom level and then just keep getting promoted. I think you have sort of the nature of the job market just changes that. I think property is a huge thing here, though, because it's the case that even if now you know, against all odds, you do really well at school, even though you're from a very poor background. Then against all odds, you do really well at university because you're from a poor background. Then you get a decent job. Your salary, even if it's OK, even if it's a sort of respectable salary, it would be dwarfed by your friend who happened to inherit a house in London, right? Because house prices are so high that a house, you know, a normal house. I mean, my parents' house in East London, sort of 2 up, 2 down, is probably, you know, worth over $500,000, right?
This isn't just a London thing, the property thing. I mean, it is insane and out of control in London, but I would say right across the country, properties now are going up massively. I know in Hull, where I'm from, if I look at the property prices there, I don't know, say 10 years ago or whatever, compared to now, there's been huge growth.
Yeah, and it's super unhealthy. I mean, we should live in a society whereby your standard of living comes from the work you do, not the wealth you have. And I think at the moment the situation we have is that if you are sitting on wealth, that wealth will accrue more and more wealth, you know, in interest and then in just the fact that house prices are rising. And what that means is that, you know, however aspirational you are, you go and get a job, which is already very difficult to do if you're from a working class background, and then still you find yourself
to get a job from a working class background?
No, sorry, a high-paid job, let's say.
Right.
It's not actually difficult for anyone to get a job now, really, because unemployment is so low. But it's very difficult to get a well-paid job because wages have been stagnating for about 20 years. But if you want to go into a well-paid job, then still that will be dwarfed by the inheritance of a colleague who happens to have wealthy parents who own a house.
Well, another report that ignores the elephant in the room, and that is white working class boys, especially at the bottom of the pile. They have been for over 20 straight years. They're the least likely demographic of any in Britain to attend university. They start at reception behind and they never catch up. And once more, their preponderance to live in communities affected by mass immigration is another elephant in the room. The Brexit referendum was a vote on this. It was a vote for people who can't afford to go to university, who feel that Britain isn't working for them. They feel trapped. They can't have the education that costs £50,000 in total. And furthermore, the low-skilled jobs that they're leaving school equipped to be employed in, they never received any help. There's not a single initiative anywhere in Britain to help these people from those communities. And then they find themselves competing with immigrant labour for minimum wage. Net 606,000 come into the UK, flooding this market. We have criminal levels of underemployed, not in education, young men. 19, 25-year-old lads are now 2.5 times more likely to be out of work than young women. An extra 56,000. This is a total group of 237 young men aged 18 to 24 not in work or education, festering, forgotten, left behind and betrayed. And they never have a voice in politics. It's always about ethnic minorities. It's always about women being left behind. The data is the data. They've been left behind Brexit was meant to be their chance to have a say. And what's happened ever since is they've tried to squash that vote. Social mobility is expensive. These people can't afford to even get on the ladder.
Now, I mean, I think you're doing, the wealthy are just a massive favour here by blaming this on migration, right? Now, if you look at where people from working class backgrounds are most likely to succeed, whatever race they're from, it's London, right? The most multicultural part of the country. So the idea that immigration is what's stopping people's
how do you afford to move to London if you're from Hull or Wigan or Mansfield?
You're misunderstanding my point. My point is not you should just move to London. My point is that there is no evidence whatsoever that the reason that social mobility is declining is because of migration. The reason social mobility is declining is because of a concentration of wealth among the very wealthy, and the fact that our economy is based much more on the value of your house and your wealth than it is about the work that you do.
There's an oversupply of cheap labour and a huge demand for housing, which pushes up the prices, all of which leaves those with the least education never getting out of that whirlpool.
Do you think you can ever change your class? Or, so for example, working class, I think working class is such a... I find it like a badge of honour, and I think it's like it's to me like I know it's going to sound a bit strange, but like it's like a presentation of like goodness. When I see working class people, I think, oh, they're like decent, salt of the earth, decent people. Do you think that when you earn more, you come out of a working class background? Because I don't. I think it's an attitude set and a value set.
I think it is, and I also think it's a case of like just not forgetting that and not forgetting where you come from. You don't get that kind of snobbery amongst the working classes who've made it, I find. Because you remember the hard times and you've tasted the pain, so you enjoy the champagne. It's that sort of mentality. Whereas people with a more entitled attitude who often despise the working classes, see them as an anomaly. We saw this with the Labour Party. Now, the Labour Party was built on the working classes, foundationed on their votes, completely betrayed by the left. And that is why they ended up voting for the Conservative Party in areas of the country we never, ever thought would go Conservative, because they were abandoned by the left. And part of that is the cancer of identity politics, which decided that these people have no social currency, they have no grievance because they're white, they're male, they're privileged, suck it up. And so they don't get any help and they're trapped at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just think it's a bit of a shame that we're talking about a report which showed that social mobility is at an all-time low. It's worse if you're non-white, right? It's worse if you're living outside of London. The reason here... Well, no, I mean, the report here is that it's... I think something you've done there, which is a little bit dishonest, is you've got black people, Asian people, white people, but then you've switched... You've divided the white people between middle class and working class.
Well, because that is a metric of their successful failure.
Are the white working class any less likely to succeed than the black working class?
Yes.
Than the black working class?
They
because
are.
you haven't... No, because the data you're using, does it distinguish between working class and middle class black people? Unless it does, that's a bad study,
No,
isn't
it's
it?
not. If you look at people on free school meals, that's the metric used in every way of appraising. White working class people, particularly boys from the same socio-economic backgrounds, fare worse in education than any ethnic minority. Fact.
Well, there you go, we like facts. This week there was a newspaper headline which called GBNews a club for the prejudice. I'll be exploring that in a couple of minutes.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle.
Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock. Martin Daubney and Michael Walker alongside me. I stand corrected, everybody, because I was saying about the pens being forced into people's hands, and I was saying you're not going to cause damage. But quite a few of you have been writing in, telling me your experience. I've had more than one person who's told me that they were forced at school to write with their right hand, and they've been left with challenges like a stutter, a stammer, for example. Some people are telling me, so you know what, I stand corrected, so I do. Right, I caught a headline this week, and I have to say it really did catch my eye because it referred to someone that I know, used to work with, and actually very much respect. I refer to Trevor Phillips. I think it's Trevor Phillips, actually. Anyway, in promoting his new programme on Sky News, he was asked about GB News, and he went on to say that basically he doesn't see GB News as a rival. He sees it as a club for people to have their views and prejudice confirmed. He went on. He said it's some kind of public service because it gives people somewhere to go who might otherwise have expressed their views in more harmful ways than going on social media. Martin Daubney, what do you think to that?
Well, I worked at Sky for many years. In fact, that's where we first met. Our eyes locked.
Don't tell everyone all of our secrets.
This is it. We first eyes locked in that Sky News green room, and that was a time actually when I think Sky had a very healthy balance of opinions. You were able to go on there and be pro-Brexit. We were. You were able to go on there and sort of say, I think actually people are going to vote for Donald Trump. I called 2 of those elections correctly on Sky, and find myself often the only person with that opinion on the entire channel. And now you don't get anybody with those opinions on Sky. And I think it's a bit rich of Trevor to say this when the whole reason I think channels like GB News exist is because the mainstream media gave our opinions no outlet. It created the market. And furthermore, Trevor saying that GB News isn't a rival, well, Breakfast Today beat Breakfast on Sky all day. Your show last night beat Sky News for the entire hour.
We do, regularly now.
And his own show often gets tonked by Camilla Tominey. So actually, we are an emerging rival.
His new show only launched this weekend, to be fair, and the time frames between him and Camilla, they only overlap for half an hour, but for that half an hour, Camilla did indeed beat his show. But
I also think to say that people you don't agree with are prejudiced is why the mainstream media yesterday, I saw, was the lowest TV ratings ever in the UK. I think people are switching off.
But wasn't that just because it's a heat wave and who wants to sit indoors watching telly when it's red hot, it's mafting outside? Why do we sit in?
It could be that, but dissatisfaction with establishment media is a huge reason why GB News even exists in the first place. Trevor's part of the problem.
Michael Walker, are we a club for the prejudice?
Well, I mean, the reason I come on the show is because I want to speak to your audience. I mean, I don't think your audience are prejudiced. I think your audience are ordinary British people, right? I suppose my critique of the channel is that I do think that it has a tendency to punch down instead of punch up. Now, on Novara Media, my channel, what we...
what does that mean?
So my analysis of what's going wrong in society tends to be that we let the rich and powerful get away with way too much, right? They're not paying enough tax. As we were talking about in the previous segment, it's very difficult now for people to climb the ladder of social mobility because the ladder has been pulled away. There are very rich and powerful people who don't want to be taxed. They don't want their sort of business interests to be challenged. And what that means is that inequality is increasing and our public services are collapsing.
Right,
now,
what's
for me,
that got to do with GB News being a club for the prejudice?
Well, what it has got to do is because I think GB News distracts from that by constantly sort of making the subject of debate vulnerable people, so trans people, migrants, people who are, in my view, not particularly powerful.
Well,
and so I think you're punched down because you talk about less...
About social mobility, where you was pointing all of the things out that you're just describing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was a great segment. But I think the preponderance of segments that sort of we cover on GB News tend to be about things such as asylum seekers, trans people. And I would say I would much prefer the focus to be much more on how the rich and wealthy get away with quite a lot, because I do think that it can be a bit of a distraction tactic.
But it's also perfectly legitimate for GB News viewers to say, hang on a minute, why are we spending billions of pounds on asylum seeking per year, £7 million on hotels per day, when we have our own homeless? So this is actually the only channel that's having those sort of conversations. That's why it's essential.
Look, I'll be very clear. The reason that I was excited about GB News when it launched is because I'd worked in commentary in the media for a long time, a decade plus, and I have two sides to my life. So I have the London media side, and then I have what I call home, which is Hull. And you can, you can sit and you can gorge on the agendas and what's interesting to people in London and what they talk about at dinner parties. That is absolutely everywhere. It's surrounded everywhere you go. That box was ticked. Those people absolutely had a home for their outlets. When I think back to the people that I know and love in Hull and some of the issues that are concerning to those people, there were very, very rarely those conversations being had within the mainstream media. So when you talk about things that was affecting local communities, so you had things like your grooming gangs, for example, when you have things like massive groups of people, migrants, whatever, being deposited into these deprived areas, that was never really talked about on mainstream media. So I think that actually what GB News does is it shines a light on the issues that matter to people, whilst also, of course, covering the issues that you just talk about, whether it's your economics or whatever. I would say to Trevor Phillips that by describing GB News as a club for the prejudice, you yourself, Trevor Phillips, you are the one that is showing prejudice. And I think actually that in itself is a real shame. Look, that is all I've got time for. I promise I will squeeze more of your views in the programme tomorrow. But for now, time flies. Michael, Martin, thank you. Thank you at home as well for watching and listening and, of course, supporting GB News. Have yourself a fantastic night. Do not go anywhere. Nigel Farage comes next.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Another warm night to come overnight with elevated temperatures for the time of year. More hot sunshine to come then into Friday. Not for everyone. There is a fair amount of medium and high-level cloud around, and there are some showers drifting north across Scotland and Northern Ireland overnight. Most of the rain not reaching the ground. These are relatively high-base showers, but could see some flashes of lightning as that clears away. Then for most places it's dry with clear spells. Some low cloud creeping into the east coast. But wherever you are, it's a warm night. A muggy feel, 18, 19, 20 Celsius in the south, mid to high teens in the north. And that sets us off for a warm start to Friday. Still some of that low cloud and mist around the east coast, but it tends to retreat during the morning to the immediate beaches. And there'll be some low cloud creeping around the southwestern coast as well, with the potential for some showers to turn up later here. Otherwise, for many, it's bright skies and another hot day. Mid to high 20s widely, 30 or 31 Celsius in the south and southeast. Then into Saturday, it's another warm start to the day. Plenty of sunshine from the word go, especially towards the east and the south. A change on the way, though, for the north and northwest. Northern and western Scotland see some showers and some cooler air later. That spreads across the northern half of the country on Sunday, clearing elsewhere on Monday.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around an ever